today is Friday of the 12th week in Ordinary Time. Our first reading today gives us a harrowing account of the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, around 586 BC. It's quite a story. 50,000 people evacuated, driven out of their home city of Jerusalem, forced to march 500 miles to Babylon to a life of slavery and servitude. Nebuchadnezzar had his troops destroy the temple, tear down the city walls, burn all of the buildings. So apart from a few thousand farmers and vine growers, there were very, very few people left in Jerusalem, and the city stood empty for something like 70 years until the return of the Jewish people. Now, in those days, 70 years, that's the change of a generation. So the generation that left died. It was their children that then returned to Jerusalem, to a city they didn't really know. And indeed, many remained in Babylon. There was a Jewish community in Babylon for many, many years following that time. So what's the picture here? The picture is life of tremendous, tremendous disruption, tremendous loss. And yet this is also the time when the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Ezekiel start to write. And what's their message? It's always a message of hope. Ezekiel writes the story of the valley of the dry bones, if you remember. The Isaiah readings, beautiful readings that we heard during Advent, all about God's promise to restore his people. And indeed he does. By 536 or so, the Jewish people start to return. Not all at once, but bit by bit. They return to Jerusalem, they rebuild the temple, they reestablish their city, and so on. So, in God's economy, there's always hope. There's always hope. But the hope may not be for one person or another person in a particular time period. It's for the people of God who are faithful to the covenant. And so you and I can take some hope in this story. This is part of our history. And take some hope in what God has done. As I read this account of the destruction of Jerusalem, what are my natural thoughts? My natural thoughts are the world that you and I live in today. The pandemic was bad enough. We're at something like day 100 of confinement. When will something that looks like normal life return? And then the protests, very rightly protesting abuses by police and others. We must continue. We must continue. But we must continue with hope. I find myself nurturing an illusion that somehow life will just will calm down after a while and I can go back to my usual life. I don't think that's true, and I'm trying to accustom myself to that reality. So how do you and I do that? God may do great things over a generation or two or three. But how about today? How about you? How about me? Our gospel tells us that Jesus cares for the leper. Jesus responds to his request for Jesus' healing. So that's our message today. Jesus will respond to you and to me, helping us, caring for us, consoling us, strengthening us, working miracles in your life and in mine. But we may have to wait for the big miracles, the big, big restitution miracles. That's for another generation. But let's be very hopeful today and very grateful that God is so good to us in our time of need.